Canadians from coast to coast to coast are seriously cynical about politics and disillusioned with the quality of both democracy and representation in this country.
From their point of view, politicians
will say anything to get elected.
Represent their parties, not their people.
Tend to navigate between lying and being hypocritical.
Care about themselves, not their constituents.
live in their ridings only during holidays and election time.
Forget about local issues once they get to the Hill.
And they're like diapers. They need to be changed often.
And this bears out in much of the research political scientists do on our MPs. We know that.
Many Canadians think MPs do a better job of representing their parties than representing their constituents.
Only 17% of Canadians trust Parliament, only 10% trust political parties.
Only 34% of Canadian youth participate in Canadian politics outside of election period.
Canadians overwhelmingly place their faith in citizen-led movements over causes led by politicians.
But does this negative perception of MPs as disconnected trained seals accord with reality?
Political scientists have spent a considerable amount of ink explaining how media shapes negative attitudes towards politicians.
The representation models MPs espouse.
The various institutional barriers that impede the work of MPs.
Party discipline and partisanship.
But there's a wide gap in the knowledge of work that MPs do locally, at home. We want to ask,
how do MPs differ in the task of representation?
How do they learn what their constituents' needs and preferences are?
How do they communicate those needs and preferences to the government?
How do MPs represent their constituents?
What do MPs even do?
And this is what the research of Professors Kelly Bladuc, Heather Bastedo, and Royce Coop hopes to achieve.
In lieu of conducting conventional forms of political science research, this project breaks new ground.
In fact, it is the first in Canadian history to employ observation methods in order to address the question of representation.
We are traveling with MPs, watching them as they interact with constituents,
taking notes as they speak at public meetings and dealing with difficult questions,
observing them when they leave their constituencies from the Hill.
We are finally putting a face to the research.
So why does this research matter?
It addresses an important gap about what political scientists know about Canadian democracy.
It is of particular interest to developed democracies concerned with representation, such as the UK and Australia.
But most importantly, as a cross-national study, this research matters to Canadians from coast to coast to coast.
Many Canadians that are cynical with their MPs in Canada have never had these MPs represented to them as hard-working, caring representatives of their constituents.
The more that citizens believe there are no connections, the more likely they are to disconnect.
If we know more about what the connections are,
how strong they are, and where they are,
then we can help people help themselves in being connected and feeling their views are actually known and are being represented.
This research, in a very real sense, has the potential to reinvigorate how Canadians perceive and go about politics.
And if there's one thing we've learned, it's that
people research matters.